Hello and welcome back to the Thinking Jew podcast, where we dive deep into Torah and Jewish philosophy, always uncovering new depths and understanding that we didn't realize was there beforehand. I'm your host, Rabbi Moshe Siegel from Richardson, Texas. As always, if you have any comments, questions on an episode, requests for a future topic on a new episode, you can always reach out to me at thethinkingjewpodcast@gmail.com. So I got a great question this week in the laws of Tevilas Kalim, which is laws of immersing new vessels into a mikvah. So I thought that would be a really cool topic to investigate a little bit today and to really try to understand the deeper perspective and understanding behind this mitzvah. So hopefully in the next 10 minutes, we'll discuss what exactly this mitzvah is, how you accomplish this mitzvah, and then if you stick through till the end, we'll discover an unbelievable depth and beautiful idea behind this mitzvah, which is really expressive of really all of Torah and mitzvah. So when you look really deep and ask the analytical questions, try to understand the more philosophical, Kabbalistic side of things, you could really uncover such amazing levels of knowledge and understanding. So, as you may have noticed from previous episodes, I always like to start at the source. So what is the source of dipping new vessels into the mikvah? If you look in Numbers chapter 31, the Jews returned from battle against the Midianites. This is after basically 40 years in the desert. The Jews are about to enter the land of Israel. One of the nations that they battle before going in is the nation of Midian. They defeat the Midianites and they bring back many spoils of war. The Torah then instructs them that before using these utensils, these items that they brought back from war, they have to first do two things with them. They have to first remove the non-kosher flavor that the Midianites had cooked into their vessels. And then after they make them kosher, after they get rid of the non-kosher flavor, they have to dunk them into a mikvah. So just to explain some basic terms, what is a mikvah? A mikvah is basically a natural gathering of water. The word mikvah really means gathering. And it's a natural gathering of water that wasn't tainted by any form of human intervention. And it's one attached body of 40 sa'ah of water, which is a biblical measurement equal to roughly 200 gallons of water nowadays. And when you completely immerse in one time something into a mikvah, it has the ability to completely transform that item. In general, in Jewish life, there's basically three different roles that a mikvah has in the daily life of a Jew. Firstly, if somebody is ritually impure, whether they're male or female, they purify themselves through going into a mikvah. Second example is when you have a non-Jew who's coming to convert to Judaism, the final part of the process of becoming a Jew is immersing in the mikvah. And the last example of use of mikvah in today's society is when we acquire vessels for food that were previously owned by a non-Jew. We also dunk them in a mikvah before we use them. This applies to utensils and pots, pans, whether they are used or new. Ideally, you should really dunk it and immerse it into a mikvah before you ever use it. But even if you already have vessels that you've used for a long time, if it wasn't immersed in a mikvah, it will not make your food not kosher. But you should still take it and bring it to a mikvah before you use it again. The basic process when you go to your local mikvah, if you don't know how to find your local mikvah for vessels, you can always reach out to me. Again, my email address is thethinkingjewpodcast@gmail.com, and I can help you locate the nearest one to your location wherever you are. And basically what you do is you make sure that the utensil is completely clean and it has no stickers on it or no tags attached to it, that you want basically the entirety of the utensil to be touching the mikvah water at one time. And then once it's completely clean, there's a blessing you make, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, blessed are you Hashem, our God, King of the universe, asher kidshanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu al Tevilas Kalim, who sanctified us with his mitzvahs and commanded us to immerse vessels. After you make this blessing, which generally when you go to the mikvah, it'll have the blessing there on the wall, you take it and you should immerse the item completely in the mikvah at one time. So that's the gist of what you do when you bring your vessels, your eating utensils, to a mikvah. And just to be clear, the only things that have to go into a mikvah are items that are made of metal, biblically only metal. The rabbis added in also glass. And only if it's an item that's used in direct contact with food. So I think we'll save the bigger picture concept of what exactly a mikvah is. How does it function spiritually? How does it create this reality of changing one from impure to pure, changing a non-Jew and transforming them into a Jew? We'll save that perhaps for an episode in and of itself to really get into mikvah. But what I want to just ask today and delve into for the next couple minutes is, why is it that these food items, these pots, pans, forks, knives, why do those specifically, of everything that we use in life, all the tools we have in life, why are those the items that have to be immersed into a mikvah? So the Jerusalem Talmud says a fascinating line, and just as a reminder, all the main sources that I quote, if you want to look them up inside, I will source them in the episode details on whatever platform you're listening to. A lot of times they're not available in English, so I'll source them if they're available in English I'll link them to the English source, but many times it's only a Hebrew link that's available. So the Jerusalem Talmud itself says that the reason why we have to dunk food items is lefi sheyatzu mitumas hanachri v'nichnasu l'kedushas Yisrael, because it left the world, the impurity of the non-Jew, and it entered into the holiness of Yisrael, of Israel. And what it seems to imply, the way that all the commentators understand, is that it's almost like a conversion process of your utensils. The same way a person, when he wants to enter under the Jewish nation, he goes into a mikvah, so too the utensils we use for food, when they want to enter into the Jewish nation, they have to go through this transformation into a mikvah. The most basic understanding of this being that as Jews, one of our roles, one of the basic concepts of Judaism is that we're supposed to enjoy this world. Judaism doesn't celebrate celibacy and asceticism. The Torah believes we should partake in this world, we should enjoy the physical world, but we should uplift it, elevate it, and connect it spiritually so that we infuse spirituality into even the most physical of actions. So I think on a basic level, what the Talmud is teaching us is that when we're eating, which is one of the base physical actions that we do, we have to elevate our physicality, infuse it with spirituality. So we take these items that interact with our food, these utensils we use with our food, and we put them in a mikvah before we use them. And I think this is really the basic concept. But I think there's an added level of depth that's missing here, because there's a big problem here. The question you can ask is, why do we do this specifically by metal items that touch food? Maybe we should dunk our clothing into the mikvah before we wear them. Maybe if you have a fancy vase that you're going to put beautiful flowers in and you're going to enjoy the beauty of the flowers in them, perhaps you should dunk the flowers or dunk the vase into a mikvah before you use it. A new watch, I don't know if it's a good idea to dump in, a new cell phone, but that's a good opportunity to elevate the physical world. What about all these other things? Why specifically does the Torah tell us that we should elevate the physicality by metal items that are used in contact with food? So I think the answer to this question can be found in the commentary of the great rabbi of Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. And on that verse in Numbers, and I'll link this source also, he says an unbelievable explanation that I think really brings out the concept of what we're doing in immersing our vessels into a mikvah. So here's what he says. He says, what does a metal utensil represent? A metal utensil represents man's ability and wisdom to display his mastery over nature and the world. The fact that we're able to use our intellect to find the natural materials that we need and to harvest them and to melt them down and fashion them and form them in order to use them for our own personal needs, that's an unbelievable representation of the greatness of the human mind and spirit. Eating, on the other hand, really belongs more in the animalistic side of human nature. So says Rav Hirsch, such a deep insight. He says as follows. He says, when you take a metal item and you use that for eating, in essence what you're doing is that represents taking the highest mental faculties that as humans were given and employing them to serve our animal nature. I'll say that one more time. I think it's such a beautiful idea. What does using metal for eating represent? It represents the highest mental faculty we have as humans and taking what makes us great, the human mind, and employing that for our own self-indulgence and self-enjoyment of eating. So the Torah wants to specifically safeguard here that we shouldn't fall into the trap of using our intellect for our own self-pleasure. Rather, the opposite, we should use our intellect to infuse spirituality into our physical pleasures. And therefore, specifically here, The Torah tells us, take this metal item, go immerse it into a mikvah, actively, intentionally sanctify that utensil, and that will cause that the food that touches that utensil afterwards will also be sanctified, and it will elevate it, and this will allow you to take the more animalistic side of us and infuse it with spirituality rather than falling to the trap of using our intellect to feed our animal side. That sums up the basic idea of immersing a vessel into a mikvah. I hope you really enjoyed this episode of the Thinking Jew podcast. As always, any questions or comments, feel free to shoot me an email, thethinkingjewpodcast@gmail.com. Have an amazing, amazing day.